All right, there are a few different new Nintendo Switch 2 news and updates I want to cover with you all today, starting with the likely answer for what's going on with game key cards in the Nintendo Switch 2 generation, because we've had rumors and reports this entire time suggesting that developers are only given a couple options, one of them being game key cards for physical release and the other one being an expensive large 64 gigabyte cartridge size. And it does seem like we have some official reports from Bloomberg, who cite an anonymous developer that may have just confirmed that for us. And we also have Bloomberg chiming in on the sales performance of third-party games for Nintendo Switch 2, and this may or may not somewhat be linked to the game key card situation, and also some conflicting reports and opinions on whether or not third-party games are living up to sales expectations that companies want to see on Nintendo's new console generation. Then we have former Blizzard president chiming in on what's going on with console prices and the increase of the retail of some of these consoles, and maybe a different explanation than what you would expect or have heard up to this point online. So interesting 2 cents, and I actually want to throw in my own thought process on this one. Then we have official unfortunate news that Borderlands 4 has been delayed for Nintendo Switch 2, although it sounds like the game just needs more time, and I would definitely recommend not releasing it in a broken state. So maybe a little bit of silver lining here, and also some new features that we might be able to expect day one when we do get the new updated launch date. And finally, we got some good news for Hades 2 and the physical edition. While you will wait a little bit longer than picking up the digital that comes out this week, you get some pretty cool stuff if you go that route, and it's actually releasing on the type of cartridge that many physical collectors want to see. So we'll break down all of this information. Before we do, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your bell notification to join Sunbro Nation if you're new here. And we are going to first kick this off right over at Go Nintendo, where you can see their following write-up, which outlines what Bloomberg is claiming around the game key card situation, and basically the option of physical media that developers and publishers have in the Switch 2 generation so far. And we'll talk about some potential solutions to what's going on here too. So Bloomberg claims Switch 2 devs can only choose from 64 gigabyte game cards or game key cards. That's not much of a choice, is it? When it comes to the Switch 2, there's one sticking point for gamers that's drawn more ire than any other. People just aren't a fan of game key cards, which are physical releases that still require the user to download data. Gamers want to buy a physical game and have the entire package right there on the game card, which has led to a considerable amount of pushback for game key cards. Whenever a third party announces a Switch 2 game, people are quick to ask if it will be a game key card release. Way more often than not, it is, which has been a rather disappointing thing to see. That usually leads to third-party devs / pubs catching a ton of heat for their decision, but now we're hearing they may simply not have any other choice. According to a report from Bloomberg, Switch 2 devs literally have 2 choices when it comes to releasing games physically on the Switch 2. They can either go with the 64 gigabyte game card that doesn't require a download, or they have to go the game key card route. You can imagine why a dev / pub wouldn't want to go the game card route, as the 64 gigabyte option is quite pricey, and there are plenty of games that won't need anywhere near that storage space. That means the dev / pub either has to eat a considerable cost or go the game key card route if they want a presence at retailers. It's clear Nintendo needs to do some sort of middle ground when it comes to game cards on Switch 2, and hopefully they're working on that right now. The distaste for game key cards from gamers has certainly been made clear, and it definitely seems like a discussion that's not going to blow over anytime soon. And we actually have seen I think Nintendo doing some investigative work to actually see how consumers feel about this game key card as the only other option, because the blowback has been substantial online, and rightfully so, because even me, somebody who's been a lifelong physical collector, I'm really not going out of my way to pick up these game key cards. It's something that I would actually rather go the digital route for the convenience factor if I just have a cartridge that does not have the game data on it and I have to download the entire file anyway. Well, we've heard a couple different kind of interesting reports around this. The Star Wars Outlaws devs actually in interviews said that it wasn't really so much the cost of the cartridge that was the issue for them, but rather there might be some concerns around the read and write speed performance of the actual game cards in comparison to when you install a game directly to the internal storage. And if that is to be believed as one of the factors that's going into this decision, Nintendo might be wise to actually implement some type of install option from a traditional game card. It wouldn't be forced necessarily, but let's say a third-party dev feels like they need that little additional read write speed that, to be fair, you can actually see real world tests of games like Mario Kart World booting up faster on the internal memory than it does off of the game cartridge whenever you have it inserted and you're loading it off of there. Obviously, you want to have more of your internal storage freed up, and game cards actually help out with that when you buy them physically. However, if you need the additional speed, having an option for third-party devs to say install required for this on cartridge game, that would not be very different than what we have with PlayStation 5 and I believe Xbox Series X. I haven't picked up a physical game period for Series X, but PlayStation 5, I am used to installing that entire Blu-ray, whatever's on there on the disc, straight onto the console internal memory. I'm not spinning that disc to read the data on it, but I am using it as that one-time dump to get it onto the actual PS5's internal storage. However, if I sell my PS5, if I don't think about it for years and years, if I boot it up 15 years from now in the future, presumably, because there's no server check for my actual game file download, I would be able to still put in that same Blu-ray, load the data onto the system, not have to worry about Sony upholding their PlayStation store for anything, and I still have my original game inbox experience all these years in the future without having to worry about anything. Something like that might be a nice option for Nintendo to implement, and I do believe that Bloomberg's info is good here on this particular story, because we're actually seeing a number of different games that are cross-gen for Switch 1 and Switch 2, and the developer and publisher will release it on a Switch 1 cartridge as a traditional cartridge, and the only option to pick it up physically on the Switch 2 is as a game key card, and that's likely coming down more to cost, because some of these games are definitely smaller in scope and would not require the load time of things to be on the internal memory. And if you can do it with the Switch 1 version, but the cartridge just wasn't as expensive, they opted to go the smaller cartridge route on the Switch 1 that does have things like 8 GB file size cartridges available, 16 and 32 GB options as well. If Nintendo could somehow implement those into the Switch 2 lineup of options for game cartridges, and maybe, from a logistics perspective with the type of 3D NAND technology they're using in that, it's just not an option, and I'm not aware of that, but it seems like Nintendo could pull additional resources and some extra strings to get those options available, and I think we would see a lot less game key cards out there in the physical ecosystem for Switch 2 if they provided some solutions. So here's hoping they continue to look into this further, release further surveys and things to really see how the fans are feeling about this. And listen, at the end of the day, money talks. If games that are only released on game key cards see a significant sales decline and they're actually not selling that well digitally, but it's also because the physical market isn't going out and picking it up as a physical edition, and that's where the drop off is easily identifiable. Yeah, there's a world that we would probably see them make some adjustments and course correct if it actually comes up to the point where third parties are unhappy with their sales on Switch 2, which actually dovetails us perfectly into our next story, because we also have Bloomberg with some question marks around this one, because we do have some industry people chiming in on this, calling into question the validity of it. But you have this article also from Go Nintendo, which outlines Bloomberg discusses supposed third-party sales struggles on Switch 2. Analyst labels it a wild take. 3+ months in, and Nintendo is back to being doomed. And you have here, less than a month after the Switch 2 launched, we saw a feature that talked about third-party sales on the platform. The article, using a little data that was available, as well as comments from anonymous company reps, said that third-party sales were slower than expected. The article received considerable pushback, yet here we are again with another feature casting doom and gloom. The most recent article to talk about the third-party Switch 2 sales comes from Bloomberg. Their piece doesn't quote devs or publishers directly, but it does share the sentiment that supposedly comes from the software creators. We've lumped together some blurbs from the Bloomberg article pertaining to Switch 2 third-party sales below. And you have here, developers hoped Nintendo's new Switch 2 would reverse the unfavorable trend. A new console launch has always been a stimulus in the industry, and the Switch 2 has been met with a surge of record-setting sales. Nintendo console users are often casual players who still tend to buy traditional games with a definitive ending. But the Switch 2 launch hasn't had such a halo effect, the maker said. Although in-house titles have proven popular, the much anticipated console hasn't generated many benefits for most outside developers. Given the wider challenges around sparking sales of new software, game developers are wary about expanding their production pipelines. The Switch 2 hasn't delivered on the boost for external developers that many might have hoped for One publisher told me that Nintendo needs to remedy its treatment of third-party game designers if it wants to see them flourish on the Switch 2. The feature seems to be a mishmash of third parties feeling their sales on the platform aren't up to snuff, along with comments from devs who haven't had a chance to bring their games to Switch 2 yet. It's a little tough to parse since there aren't direct quotes or quotes attributed to specific companies. It all seems a bit off, to be honest, and someone who feels the same way has spoken up. Matt Piscatella is the senior director and video game industry thought leader at Circana, the company that tracks game sales every month. According to Piscatella, the Bloomberg feature and commentary within makes for a wild take. Wild take, you can only sell so many consoles in a few months. No console, not PS4, Wii, or any of them significantly boosted total market while moving their first few million units. The thing just launched, what in the world? And so I do think Bloomberg may be onto something with some of the early projections that third parties are looking at for Switch 2, because this is not the first time this has come up, and we have seen some reports that third-party games on the Switch 2 were selling below the lowest expectations from some of these developers and publishers. So there may indeed be very much something to this mindset here, but also Matt Piscatella really kind of hits the nail on the head, because the Switch 2 has literally been out since June of this year. It is nowhere near being a mature, established, widely adopted console yet, and while it's gotten off to, in history, the biggest console sales launch ever, that does not mean it's going to immediately boost every single number from a third-party perspective if you're bringing a game to it, not to mention the fact that a lot of these games that are currently coming to Switch 2 have actually been out and playable on other platforms for a while, and we are kind of in this catch-up phase right now where we're getting some of those experiences on Nintendo hardware for the first time. But if you've played them on other consoles and you own a PS5 or a Series X and you've played some of these big third-party games, you might also not be going to opt to go buy those day one. Not to mention, you might have some hesitation with picking up a lot of these as a game key card, and that could definitely fall into the sales conversation as well. So an interesting take, but I do think Nintendo probably will look pretty strong long-term for third-party sales in this console generation. But right now, there is some reason to believe that it's maybe not the smoothest ride and smoothest sailing of a start so far for Nintendo. But that said, it's a very early generation, and typically day one adopters for Nintendo hardware, they're probably picking up first-party Nintendo games first and the third-party stuff afterwards. Cyberpunk 2077, however, seems to be celebrated as a big sales success, so maybe not all third-party games are struggling. Okay, from here we have former Blizzard president, console price increases are not tariff issues, they are profit issues. And stick with me on this, because just the headline alone makes it sound like it's not a tariff issue. It's definitely a factor, but we have been having this question mark in our heads about why are we seeing multiple price raises from Microsoft when tariffs were only really adjusted once in terms of the percentage that is going on between the trade deal with US and China right now. So you have Xbox fans got another shock last week as Microsoft was the latest video game company to announce hardware price increases, not decreases. Microsoft joins both Sony and Nintendo in increasing the price of video games hardware. Former Blizzard president Mike Barra was quick to say on social media that the price increases we have been seeing on a console for the second time are not tariff issues and are instead profit issues. Speaking about Microsoft's second price increase, he said that tariffs went up once, so that just doesn't justify the single price increase. He says while referring to the initial spike in cost, an excuse to continue raising prices with no new increase in tariffs is simply a different problem, and they are going to make consumers continue to pay for those problems. And so the exact quote here reads as follows: console price increases are not tariff issues, they are profit issues, and the reason why profits are not where they should be is a far, far deeper issue versus the tariff excuse. And so again, there have been real world trade adjustments in tariff percentages from the US and other countries that clearly the manufacturers at the end of the day may choose to pass on that additional cost to the consumer, and that's definitely a factor in what's going on here. But the interesting part about it being a profit issue, and you might realize that a lot of these game hardware manufacturers sell their hardware at a loss. Sony and Microsoft specifically, this is their typical business model. Sell your hardware at a loss for quite a while, the entire life cycle in some cases, or at least half the life cycle of the console being on store shelves, because you're actually going to make back all your profit and then some on the software side of the business. So even though you're taking a $50 or $100 loss on the hardware, maybe a little bit more than that, you actually are going to make that back in revenue on software sales when it is performing up to a certain level of expectations. But in Xbox's case, Sure, you have the tariff increases that hit for one, then you start to look at the Game Pass model, how much revenue is that bringing in versus how much Microsoft is paying out. And if they start to really look at them still just breaking even or maybe even selling the Series X at a true loss, they might decide to reevaluate if it's worth it to lose money on that line of console hardware anymore, when the fact is that they're not making it back on the game performance side of things. And that might actually help our concerns just a little bit for Sony and Nintendo being in this situation right now where we don't know if they're going to do further price adjustments. Sony is definitely in a pretty comfortable spot in terms of software sales, and I'd say the video game industry as a whole is definitely in a rocky spot right now, but all things considered, Sony has some good momentum on their side, and hopefully we would not see them result to an extra price increase. And Nintendo, we have to wait and see. Again, my thought process is nothing is safe after this first holiday season in terms of maybe that $450 price point moving to something like $500 for the Switch 2 and just taking away the bundle option or moving the bundle option to $550. I think something like that is actually a realistic possibility we could see, especially since Nintendo has raised the price of their whole Switch 1 lineup of systems. But Nintendo may also be in this acquisition phase where they are okay with breaking even or being a little bit unprofitable on the Switch 2 hardware, as long as the software sales are there to offset the other part of that loss. And so that's what will be interesting to see is there just a broader profit issue in this gaming industry? And that is also a big contributing factor to what's going on with some of these price increases. And no doubt all of it going on while tariffs are happening, not helping the situation. So it'll be an interesting one to continue to monitor, but just an interesting different take that I saw online compared to some other stuff I've seen in the past. Okay, moving on from here, Borderlands 4 delayed indefinitely on Nintendo Switch 2, statement released, and Borderlands 4 is seeing a delay on Nintendo Switch 2 that comes a little bit more than a week until the game was expected on the console. And we'll just go through the exact post here, which was posted on the official Twitter account, Vault Hunters. We need to share the release of Borderlands 4 on Nintendo Switch 2 is being delayed. We do not take this decision lightly, but are committed to ensuring we deliver the best possible experience to our fans, and the game needs additional development and polish time to do that. Our hope is to also better align this release with the addition of cross saves, which we are working on and recognize is very important. We will update you all on new release timing once we fully adjusted our plans. In accordance with Nintendo's policy, all digital pre-orders to date will have to be canceled. Customers can initiate that process themselves now, or it'll happen automatically starting Friday, September 26th. For physical pre-orders, please reach out to the corresponding retailer. We greatly appreciate feedback, support, and patience of our fans of the community. It's truly what keeps us going. And yeah, unfortunate news if you were looking forward to this release right around the corner in early October. Now it's going to be something that you will have to wait longer. But listen, for me, even though it's not going to be fun for fans that were really chomping at the bit to play this game on Switch 2, I would much rather see them delay a game, polish it up, and not release it as a broken, buggy mess, and then have to go apply patch after patch to actually get it to an acceptable standard. We talked about this in some of the upcoming Switch 2 game video from yesterday. Go check that out if you haven't. 14 different games I go through that are anticipated for me on the Switch 2. Borderlands 4, I mentioned you might want to check out some early performance reviews on it. It had some not so great talk around it at the recent gaming conventions like PAX West and Gamescom, and it just seemed like maybe it was one of those that did need additional polish time, and that's what they're choosing to do here. Again, always better to delay and create a finished product day one than put out something that you're pretty much beta testing, which I think the Borderlands community, if you look around at Borderlands 4 on like PC and stuff, doesn't seem like it's going great over there in all aspects of those camps. So maybe some delay time could have been used for the PC side of things as well, but regardless, that's already been released. Switch 2 users will hopefully get a better and more complete experience whenever it does finally make it to the platform. And lastly, to close this out here real quick, Hades 2 Nintendo Switch and Switch 2 physical editions dated for November. And you have here the physical edition of Hades 2 for Nintendo Switch and Nintendo Switch 2 has received a release date. Unfortunately, there's a fair bit of delay between the digital release and the physical release, with the physical edition not coming until the 20th of November. The physical edition of Hades 2 includes both the Nintendo Switch 2 and Switch versions of the game on a standard game card. It also includes a full color character compendium booklet, soundtrack download code, and reversible cover, so it's well worth picking up. That's if you could stand the wait. So yeah, Hades 2 literally out tomorrow at the time you're seeing this video go live digitally. You have to wait longer for the physical edition, which I'm not a fan of that in general, but I will say that this being a full on cartridge experience, not a game key card, like we've talked about plenty in this video already, and you have the Switch 1 and 2 version of the game thrown on that cartridge so you can play it in either console. That's all stuff that's just a win, and things that you don't always see games release in that state, especially for physical collectors, and this one being probably a cool one that some physical collectors, including myself, would want to own in the collection. I'm happy to see that. Even nice things like reversible cover art and some additional character booklets included in there. Like, how often do you open a game case and find a booklet in there nowadays? It is a rarity, unfortunately. So this one's going to be cool, and probably one that I'll be picking up and checking out on the channel digitally right at release, and then we will, you know, kind of tackle the physical thing whenever that comes around. I may double dip on this if I really fall in love with it on its digital release. But let me know your take on all these different stories we talked about in the comments down below. Do you think that, yes, indeed, the reports are true, that there's just a couple options from Nintendo in terms of physical media choices? And do you think that's why we're seeing a lot of game key cards this generation? And what's your personal proposed solution to that? What do you think about the third-party game sales performance on the Switch 2? Are you with Bloomberg on this report? Are you with more Matt Piscatella? Do you think that there's any credence to the idea that it's more of a deep profit issue with a lot of these companies at the end of the day on price increases, especially whenever we see multiple of them, like in Microsoft's case, as opposed to it just being 100% on the tariff side of things? Were you picking up Borderlands 4 for Switch 2? Are you disappointed to hear about the delay? Or are you just more relieved that it's going to be in a better playable condition? And finally, for Hades 2, are you going to be maybe opting to get this game digitally earlier on? Or are you going to potentially wait for this November 20th release of the full complete on cartridge physical edition? So make sure you share all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below before you leave, regardless if we agree or disagree. Also, make sure you like, subscribe, turn your notification bell. And with that, I've been Sunbro, you've been Nation. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.